What's up, everybody? I'm Brendan. I'm a full stack developer based in Brooklyn, New York. And today I'm going to be walking you through the solution for the Workaround project. It's part of the Intermediate JavaScript Modules series here on Code Academy. We're going to be talking all about modules today. We're going to be flexing our JavaScript module muscles, importing and exporting different ways. We're also going to be touching on aliasing when we import and export. So let us dive into it. Workaround. Workaround is a human resources program that returns basic information about an employee based on salary data. Using Workaround, one can use an employee's salary data to return the cadre of the employee. In other words, whether this employee is entry-level, mid-level, or senior level, calculate employee tax rates, return employee benefits, calculate employee bonuses, calculate the total amount an employee can be reimbursed based on the total value of their health, housing, or wellness benefits. Workaround currently contains the data and functions in a single file, though they would like to modify the program so it makes use of JavaScript modules. Specifically, Workaround wants you to demonstrate the different ways to export and import modules. Step 1. Run the program in employee.js to view the output in the console. Okay. Notice that the getEmployeeInformation function at the bottom of the file returns the cadre, tax, benefits, bonus, and reimbursement eligibility based on a person's pay grade. All right, so this is this pay grade object that they're talking about, and all of these functions are getting called down here. Okay, I see. So this console.log logs what's returned from all of these functions up top. And they're calling this kind of function that's outputting or logging all of the things that we see in the console over here. And they're passing it different levels of input salary. So based on what the input level is, all of these different functions can kind of calculate, based on the salary level, what type of taxes that they're going to be paying, what type of benefits, bonuses, etc. And it's telling us that all of these things are in one file, and we as JavaScript developers know that we need to keep our files organized. So I already know, and you guys should too, that it doesn't really make sense to be calling this function here, because this function and the rest of these functions that actually do something like calculating benefits and calculating salary, they're not the same type of functions. This is more of a let's start the app function, whereas these are actually like functional, what's my benefits, what's my salary, etc. All right, step 2, let's transform the program using modules. We'll first segment the program by placing the behavior and data in employee.js and the use of the data in workaround.js. Copy the getEmployeeInformation function and the 3 function calls beneath it and paste the function into the workaround.js file. Be sure to remove the copied code from employee.js completely. All right, and put it in workaround and save that. All right, so we have just taken out the function that's actually displaying things to the console and kept only the functions in here that actually calculate pay grades, cadre, bonus, etc. So these are purely functional, and these are more of like display functions. Notice that when you run the program, the console returns a reference error that salary is not defined. We'll fix this as we build out the program with modules. Salary is not defined at getEmployeeInformation in the file workaround.js line 2. I'm sorry, workaround.js line 4. So what's blowing up right now is get cadre, calculate tax, get benefits. All of these functions aren't even defined in this file. They're defined now in the employee.js file. So when you run this, it's like, well, I don't even know what get cadre is. So what are you talking about? All right. Step 3. Let's turn the contents of the information in employee.js into a module. At the top of the file, using let, set the employee to an object that represents the module. You will not see any output yet. So we're going to construct this employee object, and then we're going to slowly but surely assign properties to this object. Those properties are going to be this function, so that once we're done with that, we could just export this one employee object with all of these functions attached to it as properties. Okay, and we're still going to get errors. Oh, maybe not. Step 4, move the salary property inside the employee object, keeping the default value of 100,000 using the appropriate syntax for defining a property and its value. Remember, when you are constructing an object, you want to use the key and then a colon and then the value. Recall that we can also set properties inside the object, and it has the same value as if it was declared outside the object as employee.salary. We'll be declaring salary inside the employee object in this project. So what does that say? It says employee.salary equals 100,000. Is that too many? 1, 2, 3. So what it's saying is line 3 here, this object this employee object with a property of salary pointing to this value is exactly the same as line 7. So let's just use 1. I'm going to use this one because it tells me to. Step 5. For the rest of the functions in employee.js, define get cadre, calculate tax, get benefits, calculate bonus, and reimbursement eligibility as properties on the employee object. If you are uncertain about the proper syntax for this, check the hint. We do not need to define pay grades as a property of the employee module for this project. You will not see output yet. Okay, so we're going to take these functions now. We're going to ignore pay grades, and we're going to take each function and attach it to the object employee that we just constructed. So employee dot get cadre is going to point to a function. All right, so I'm going to pause the video for now, but when I come back, I'm just going to be doing the same thing for all the rest of the functions all the way down to the bottom. So I'll be right back. All right, so I'm back. I've created more properties for this employee object. For instance, calculate bonus is now pointing to a function, so that eventually you'll be able to call employee.calculate bonus, like that, and it'll fire that function. Okay, step 5 is done. Make sure that's saved. In employee.js, within the body of each function, closely check that each property of the employee object is defined on employee. For example, every instance of salary should be defined as employee.salary since it is a property of the employee object. Note that you will not see output yet. All right, so let me start at the top here. And everywhere that we see salary, notice that I've added an employee.salary, because without it, we call employee.getCadre, and it's looking for this variable called salary, and it's not going to find it. It's not going to find it because, remember, at the top, it's now defined as a property on the employee object. So that means that we need to tell this function that salary is now located on the employee object. So we add this employee dot to everywhere that we see salary. So notice I've added it here. I've added it here as well. And also notice that some of these functions actually call other functions like getCadre. So remember, without it, and this is how it was before, it was like this. GetCadre doesn't exist anymore. But what does exist? Employee.getCadre. Make sure wherever you see getCadre function, you also attach employee dot to the front of it. All right, step 7. We'll now export the module in employee.js at the very bottom of this file. Export the module employee module using the export default syntax. Oh, I'm also getting a weird error here. Okay, so you see here, line 4, this is not how we construct objects. Okay, so you see this error that we're getting here? It's pointing to salary, and it does not like that semicolon, so let's remove that. Save. Okay, and we're good to go here. All right, so this is not part of the lesson, but I just want to show you what would happen if we had multiple properties inside this employee object like this. So cheese, cheese, error. All right, so no error. So when you have properties attached to an object, you need to separate each key value pair with comma. You can't use semicolon. Does not like that. It's just a weird part of the syntax you have to memorize. When you have properties on an object, separate the key value pairs by commas. I'm going to remove that. And if there's only one key value pair in a object, you don't even need that comma. And same for the last. Like for instance, cheese, cheese. So if the key value pair is the last key value pair of that object, then you don't need a comma. If you add in a comma, then JavaScript would be like, all right, I'm expecting another one and I don't see one, so I'm going to throw an error. That's weird, but you usually would see an error. Anyways, I guess you can ignore that for now. Remove that. All right, step 7. We'll now export the module in employee.js at the very bottom of this file. Export the module employee module using the export default syntax. All right, export default employee. And a note here, you can only export default one thing in a file. You can't have multiple export defaults in one file. Now, because everything is attached to this object employee, then we'll have access to everything attached to that object employee. Step 7 is done. Step 8 in workaround.js, import the employee module using the import statement. Recall that you will need to import the module using .employee file path. Note that you will still see the reference error at this point. So I'm over here in my workaround file, and I'm going to import employee, and I don't have to wrap it in curly braces because it's not a named import. So it's not a named export from. Now notice I'm not wrapping employee in curly brackets here because we're not using the named export syntax. We're using export default, and if we're using export default, then we don't need to wrap whatever object that we exported or anything we exported in curly brackets. From what file path employee, and just part of the syntax, you don't have to include that .js at the end of the file. Save that, and it's saying that we're still going to get reference errors. Okay, so that's fine. Step 9, in workaround.js in the get employee information function, modify the variables such that they are property on the employee module. For example, salary should be defined as employee.salary, and calculate tax should be modified to employee.calculate tax. You should see the program's output. Okay, so now that we've imported this employee object with all of these properties on it, including a starting default salary, we now need to tell this workaround.js file that these functions are located on this employee object. So let's do that. Employee.salary. Okay. Alrighty. Now, one of the confusing parts that I was struggling to understand was these functions in here rely on this pay grades object. So how are we able to access pay grades when we call these functions, even though pay grades doesn't exist in this file? And just go with me here. This is the way I think about it. When we import this employee object and we call get cadre or calculate tax, for instance. Calculate tax. Let's look at calculate tax. So notice that it relies on pay grades. But pay grades wasn't even imported or attached to the employee object. So how does this function know what pay grades is? Well, you can just think of this import as I want to see a wormhole into another file. So because we're importing this employee object, it's really not in, we're not really taking that file and bringing it into another file. We're just building a bridge between both files. So now this employee.salary or employee.getCadre or employee.calculateTax function is actually just pointing to this exact line of code here. And if you think of it like a bridge, so we imported that employee object, we're now able to connect that bridge from both of these files and from the workaround file into the employee.js file. We built that bridge. So now we're actually transported to this file, and pay grades does exist in this file, so that's why we're able to call it. That's just the way I think about this. All right, step 10. Nice job. Workaround now asks you to demonstrate how to export both traditional variables and variables as aliases. In order to do this, we'll need to modify each of the functions so they are no longer properties on the employee object. You will not see output at this point. Okay, so it's saying remove these functions from the employee object, and let's just turn them back into normal functions and export them. So function getCadre now equals a function. All right. And I'm going to pause the video for now and come back with all of these functions kind of standing alone, no longer attached to the employee object. Be right back. All right, so I'm back, and notice that I've removed each function from that employee object. Okay. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, why have I not removed this? And you're right thinking this way, and that's actually step 11. So step 11, you'll also need to make sure that each mention of a function is no longer a property on the employee object. Specifically, getCadre will no longer be a property of the employee object. However, you can leave salary as employee.salary since it is inside the object. All right, so don't touch anywhere where you see employee.salary, but if you see employee.getCadre, remove that employee object because it no longer exists. Or sorry, the object still exists, but these functions are kind of standalone, no longer attached to the employee object. I'm bound to miss one here, but we'll see. getCadre, getCadre, getCadre. Okay, I think that's it, hopefully. Oh, no equal sign here. My bad. Okay, cool. Step 12. Now in employee.js, modify the export statement such that you export the variables as the following. All right, so now we're actually going to be exporting using aliasing. Okay, so employee with no alias. So that means that we're no longer going to be using the export default syntax. We're just going to be using the export named export syntax. So we have to wrap everything in curly braces. Employee with no alias, cadre the function as cadre. Some of you might be wondering, well, isn't getCadre a function? So how does this export know that getCadre is a function? Because we're treating it right now as a variable. But if you went something like this, JavaScript would read that as you calling the actual function and call it, which is not what we want. We just want a reference to the function, which is what getCadre is. Calculate tax as tax. Get benefits as benefits. So we're taking each function and exporting it, but in the export we're saying take this function and rename it and treat it so that it gets called as this. All right, where was I? Calculate bonus as bonus. Reimbursement ability as reimbursement. Sweet. Step 12 is done. Step 13, in workaround.js, import the following variables: employee, cadre, tax, benefits, bonus, reimbursement. When you run the code, you will get a type error. Why will we get a type error? Well, because we haven't changed any of these functions that no longer exist on this object. So I'm going to pause this video. I'll be right back with everything imported. All right. Notice how I'm only importing them as their alias. Right now, get cadre no longer exists because I export it as cadre. Sorry, it doesn't exist in this file anymore. But cadre points to get cadre, which does exist right here. And same goes for the rest of them. Step 13 is done. Step 14, in workaround.js, in the getEmployeeInformation function, modify the function such that each of the variables is written as its alias. For example, employee.getCadre will be modified to cadre. You should see the program's output. Okay. So we're keeping employee.salary as is because that's how we've exported it. Employee.salary still exists. And in our functions, we still rely on this employee object with the property of salary to calculate all of these other things. So leave this alone, but for the rest of them, getCadre is no longer employee.getCadre. It's now just cadre. Awesome, and it works. Step 15, nice work. Workaround asks you to demonstrate one more thing. Combine both exporting variables as they're declared and the export default statement. In employee.js, use the export keyword to export get cadre, calculate bonus, la 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 la, as they are declared. At the bottom of the file, use the export default statement to export the employee module. All right. So now it's time to remove this massive named export down here. We're going to export default, the employee object. We'll change how we import it in the other file, but it's also saying export all of these other functions as they are declared. And I'm going to take that to mean that that means that they want us to inline export them. So just add an export to everywhere where you see a function call or a function declaration. Export. Honestly, I like the other way of doing things where you have all of the exports down here in the curly brackets. I just think it looks cleaner. But you know, if they want us to do this, then that's got to do what you got to do. Step 15 is done. Step 16, in workaround.js, write an import statement that imports each of the variables using their variable names. Beneath this statement, write another import statement that imports the employee module. Your code will return a reference error. We'll resolve this in the next step. Okay. Pause the video. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. We're going to get a reference error, but we have successfully imported each named function or named import or export. We've wrapped them in curly braces because they're named imports. And remember, we use the export default syntax, so we don't need the curly braces when we use export default. So we import it just as is as employee. All right, and why do we get this reference error? Well, because those aliases of those functions no longer exist, so we need to replace them. Step 17. In a last and final step, whoa, are we missing something? Did I miss checking off a box? Yes, we did. Jeez. Step 17, in a last and final step in Workaround.js, modify the getEmployeeInformation function such that it refers to the variables that were exposed as declared as well as the employee module. You should see the program's output that were exported as declared. Sorry. All right, so get cadre, calculate tax, benefits, funds, and reimbursement eligibility. Oh no, we've got an error. Workaround.js line 13. Employee.getBenefits. Employee.getBenefits is not a function. Workaround.js line 8. Yes, it is. Oh, okay. Forgot to export get benefits. Notice though that the errors are super helpful. Oh, geez, I forgot them for all these other ones too. Come on, guys. All right, that should be good now. The errors are super helpful though, right? It told us get benefits is not defined, and I was like, what are you talking about? It clearly is. I look back and it's not. I didn't even export it, so technically it wasn't defined. Boom, and there we go. Step 17 is done, and that is it for this project, which is called Workaround. We have successfully flexed our cardio muscles for another round. I hope after this practice, modules are starting to click now. Importing and exporting are starting to click. And you'll realize as you learn to code that it's just so much easier to code clean. When you start working with other people and you start looking at what they've coded, you're going to begin to pick up how people organize their code. And honestly, when you work with certain people who are more organized than others, you totally want to work with the other people who are more organized because it's just that much easier on you. You know exactly where everything is. Everything is nice and neat. You know where to look for certain things, et cetera, et cetera. Alrighty, folks, so that's it for this project, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.